You know what is almost offensive? The fact that one of the most important brain performance molecules discovered in the last 2 decades has been sitting in the bodybuilder aisle this entire time, right next to the protein powder with a 22-year-old on the label, marketed to people who want bigger arms, priced at under $20, ignored by almost every person over 40 who actually needs it. Not for their arms, for their brain. Here is what most people do not know. After 40, the brain starts losing its ability to generate emergency fuel fast enough to meet cognitive demand. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough that things start feeling slower, harder, foggier. And most people accept that as aging. It is not aging. It is a fuel system problem. Your body is an engine, a precision machine built to run for decades. Your brain is the control center that governs everything else. And like any high-performance system, it does not decline because it is old.
It declines when the maintenance stops matching what the machine actually needs. This is about one specific maintenance gap, the one hiding in plain sight, the one most people over 40 are walking past every time they go to a pharmacy. If you leave now, you will keep walking past it. Stay. The brain's energy crisis after 40. Let's start with something that changes how you see everything else. Your brain is not a thinking organ that occasionally needs energy. It is an energy organ that happens to think. Let that sink in for a moment. At rest, the brain consumes roughly 20% of your body's total energy output. 20%. For an organ representing about 2% of your body weight, this is not a system running on idle. This is a system running at full capacity, continuously, whether you are solving a complex problem or staring out a window. And energy, in biological terms, means one thing: ATP, adenosine triphosphate.
The molecular currency that powers every cellular process, keeping you alive, alert, and functional. Now, here is what most people never consider. ATP is not stored, not in any meaningful quantity. Your body produces it, burns it, and recycles it in a continuous loop. It is not a tank you fill once a week. It is a generator that has to keep running when the lights go out. Not eventually, immediately. When you are young, that generator is fast, efficient, and well supplied. The recycling rate is high. The production is responsive. Your brain asks for fuel, and the system delivers almost instantly. After 40, the generator starts aging. The mitochondria, the structures inside your cells responsible for producing ATP, begin to decline in both number and efficiency. This is one of the most documented processes in all of aging biology. Not theoretical, not contested. Measurable, consistent, and well-established across decades of research. Fewer mitochondria, slower mitochondria. A generator running at 70 or 80% of its previous output, powering a control center that still has the same demands. And here is where it gets precise. Inside the brain, there is a specific mechanism designed to handle moments of peak cognitive demand. When neurons fire at high frequency, during complex decisions, sustained focus, rapid memory retrieval, they need ATP faster than the mitochondria can produce it through standard metabolic pathways. The system that handles this is called the phosphocreatine shuttle. Think of it as the brain's emergency fuel line, a rapid response reserve. Phosphocreatine, a charged form of creatine stored in brain tissue, can donate a phosphate group to regenerate ATP almost instantly. Not in a metabolic cycle, instantly. This is the difference between a control center that responds in real time and one that lags under load. When that emergency reserve is well stocked, your brain handles cognitive spikes the way a precision engine handles sudden acceleration: smooth, immediate, controlled. When that reserve runs low, the brain still functions, but it compensates, it reroutes, it uses slower pathways. And that compensation is exactly what you experience as fog, as the word that floats just below the surface, as the task that requires noticeably more effort than it should. Now, here is what makes this specific to your life right now. Your brain produces some creatine internally, but that synthesis capacity decreases with age, and the primary dietary source, meat, provides creatine in quantities that were adequate at 25 in a body with robust synthesis capacity and efficient absorption. At 45, 50, 55, that equation has changed. The synthesis is slower. The absorption is less efficient. And the demand from an aging system operating under chronic cognitive load is, if anything, higher. The result is a phosphocreatine buffer that runs chronically below the level it should. Not empty, not catastrophically low, just consistently below the threshold where the emergency fuel line works the way it was designed to. You feel this not as a medical crisis. You feel it as your normal, as what you have come to call getting older. It is not getting older. It is a specific, addressable gap in the brain's fuel infrastructure, and understanding that gap is the first step toward closing it. What the research actually shows. Now, let's talk about what happens when you close that gap. This is where the conversation shifts from biology to evidence, and the evidence is more compelling than most people in the creatine space are willing to say clearly. One of the most significant studies in this area was published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society. Researchers gave participants creatine supplementation for 6 weeks and then measured cognitive performance across a battery of standardized tests: working memory, processing speed, the ability to hold and manipulate information under load. The results showed clear, statistically significant improvements compared to placebo. But here is the detail that most people who cite this study leave out. The older participants improved more than the younger ones. Not slightly more, meaningfully more. The gap in improvement between age groups was large enough to be one of the study's notable findings. And when you understand the phosphocreatine system, this makes complete sense. The baseline deficit is larger in older adults. The emergency fuel line is more depleted, so restoring it creates a more perceptible change. An engine running at 65% has more room to improve than one already running at 90%. This pattern has replicated across multiple studies now. A meta-analysis examining randomized controlled trials on creatine and cognition found consistent improvements in memory performance in healthy adults, with the strongest effects in individuals over 60. The domains showing the clearest signal were working memory, episodic memory, and processing speed. These are not abstract cognitive categories. These are the specific functions people over 40 notice degrading first. The name that takes an extra second to retrieve. The multi-step task where you lose your place halfway through. The conversation where you know exactly what you want to say, but the words arrive half a beat late. The mental endurance that runs out before the workday does. These are phosphocreatine buffer failures. Measurable, consistent with the research, and addressable. There is also a layer of this that goes beyond performance. Several studies have looked at creatine's relationship to oxidative stress in neural tissue. Oxidative stress is what happens when the brain's cellular machinery produces reactive byproducts faster than it can neutralize them. It is the equivalent of combustion residue building up in an engine that is not being properly maintained. Over time, that residue accelerates the kind of cellular damage that contributes to long-term cognitive decline. Creatine appears to buffer this process. Not eliminate it, buffer it, reduce its rate, slow the accumulation of damage that, left unaddressed over years, shifts from "I feel a bit foggy" to something more permanent. Think about the overnight maintenance cycle. While you sleep, the brain runs what neuroscientists call the glymphatic system, a cleaning protocol that flushes metabolic waste from neural tissue. Creatine's role in supporting that process is part of why consistent supplementation over months shows different results than supplementation over 2 weeks. You are not just fueling the day. You are supporting the repair cycle that runs every night. And here is something the research showed that almost nobody talks about. The cognitive benefits of creatine supplementation were most pronounced in people who were sleep-deprived or operating under high cognitive load at baseline, not in people who were already well-rested, low stress, and optimally nourished. In other words, the more your control center is under pressure, the more you actually need it to perform, the more meaningful the fuel buffer becomes. If you are a high-functioning adult over 40, running on interrupted sleep, high cognitive demand, and a body that is already managing the metabolic shifts of midlife, you are precisely the person this research was describing, not the 20-year-old athlete. You. The hormonal layer. When the software changes, the fuel system pays. Now we need to look at something most people do not want to think about. We have been talking about creatine and brain energy as if the brain exists in a controlled environment, as if the fuel system operates independently of everything else running in the engine. It does not. The brain operates inside a hormonal environment, and after 40, that environment undergoes a fundamental shift. For women, the shift is accelerating and often abrupt. For men, it is slower, quieter, and consistently underestimated. And what those hormonal changes do to the brain's energy metabolism does not get nearly enough attention in either the longevity conversation or the creatine conversation. So let's be precise. In the engine model, hormones are the software, the firmware running the hardware. They do not physically move the pistons, but they govern how efficiently the entire system converts inputs into outputs. They regulate temperature tolerance. They set the thresholds for repair cycles. They determine how the engine allocates resources under load.
When the firmware is current and running cleanly, the hardware performs near its potential. When the firmware starts degrading, the hardware compensates, strains, produces the same output at higher cost. And over time, that higher cost accumulates as wear. Now, estrogen. Most people understand estrogen as a reproductive hormone, something that governs cycles, fertility, the changes of menopause. That understanding is accurate and dangerously incomplete. Estrogen is a neuroactive steroid. It acts directly on the brain. It supports mitochondrial function in neural tissue. It enhances neuronal sensitivity to glucose. It promotes the production and recycling of ATP in the brain's most energy-demanding regions. And it directly supports the enzymes responsible for creatine synthesis and phosphocreatine recycling. When estrogen is robust, the brain's fuel system has hormonal backup. The phosphocreatine buffer is supported. The mitochondria are more efficient.
The control center runs closer to its potential. When estrogen begins to decline, which in many women starts in the early to mid-40s, years before the final menstrual period, the brain's energy metabolism begins to change in measurable ways, not hypothetically. Brain imaging studies using spectroscopy have measured this directly. They can see the change in energy metabolites in brain tissue as estrogen levels fall. The mitochondria become less efficient, the phosphocreatine buffer becomes harder to maintain, glucose metabolism in the brain shifts toward a less efficient pattern, and all of this happens at the same time that the mitochondria are already aging independently. This is why so many women in perimenopause describe cognitive symptoms with a specificity that surprises even their doctors. Not just fatigue, not just mood changes, brain fog with a particular texture, the sense that the retrieval system has a delay, that holding a complex thought requires active effort.
That the control center, which used to run silently in the background, now makes noise. It is not imagination. It is a fuel system under compounded pressure. Two systems weakening simultaneously, each accelerating the other's decline. Now, the male side, because it is handled even more poorly in the public conversation. Testosterone decline in men after 40 is real, measurable, and metabolically consequential. Not in the caricatured way of low testosterone advertising, but consistently, reliably, with cognitive implications that most men attribute to stress or overwork, until the pattern becomes undeniable. Testosterone supports mitochondrial efficiency in neural tissue. It influences creatine kinase activity, the enzyme managing the phosphocreatine shuttle. It contributes to the structural integrity of neural tissue over time. As testosterone declines, men often notice cognitive shifts before physical ones. Slower processing under pressure, lower mental endurance.
Reduced capacity for the kind of sustained, complex thinking that used to feel automatic. This gets labeled as burnout, middle age, the inevitable cost of a demanding life. Sometimes those things are part of it, but underneath, there is a consistent, measurable change in how the brain's fuel system is being hormonally supported. And here is the compounding effect that makes this critical. When creatine levels in the brain are already declining due to aging, and the hormonal support for creatine metabolism is simultaneously declining, you get a cascading failure. Two systems weakening at the same time. The total effect is not additive, it is multiplicative. Each failure makes the other more severe. Research examining cognitive aging in both sexes has found that the decline in brain creatine levels correlated not only with chronological age, but with the degree of sex hormone decline. People with more significant hormonal drops showed faster decreases in brain creatine concentrations. And correspondingly worse performance on the cognitive tasks that rely on rapid fuel availability. The control center is not aging in a vacuum. It is aging inside a changing hormonal environment that is actively affecting its fuel supply, which means that addressing the fuel supply without understanding the hormonal context is incomplete maintenance. And understanding the hormonal context without addressing the fuel supply is equally incomplete. The engine does not have departments, it has systems. The protocol. What supplementation actually looks like after 40. Now let's get specific about what to do, because an in-depth explanation of brain fuel that ends without a clear protocol is just theory, and theory without application is noise. Here is what the evidence supports for older adults and cognitive function, not for 25-year-olds chasing a personal record. First, the form. Walk into any supplement store and you will find creatine in a dozen variations. Creatine hydrochloride, creatine ethyl ester, buffered creatine, creatine nitrate. Each one marketed with claims of superior absorption, better bioavailability, fewer side effects. Most of those claims are not supported by research of comparable quality to what exists for creatine monohydrate. Creatine monohydrate has decades of human research behind it, hundreds of studies, clear safety data across long-term use, consistent cognitive and physical performance outcomes across populations. For a person over 40 who is thinking about this as a long-term maintenance protocol, that track record is not just reassuring, it is the point. You are not optimizing for novelty, you are optimizing for reliability. When you are maintaining a precision engine for the long term, you use components with a verified performance history, not the newest part on the market with 6 months of data. Use creatine monohydrate. The micronized version dissolves more easily in water and may reduce the mild digestive discomfort some people experience, not because it is chemically superior, only because it is easier to take consistently, and consistency is everything here. Now, the dose. The traditional approach to creatine supplementation involves a loading phase, high doses, typically 20 grams per day for the first 5 to 7 days, followed by 3 to 5 grams daily for maintenance. This approach saturates muscle creatine stores quickly. For older adults focused on brain function, this loading approach is unnecessary and often counterproductive. High doses in the first week frequently cause digestive discomfort that is enough for people to abandon the protocol entirely. And for cognitive purposes, the research does not require rapid saturation. The brain does not need to be flooded. It needs to be consistently supplied. Studies on brain creatine elevation in older adults have shown that 3 to 5 grams per day, without a loading phase, achieves equivalent brain tissue saturation over 3 to 4 weeks. The endpoint is the same. The journey is more tolerable. And for a long-term maintenance protocol, tolerability determines whether you actually sustain it. There is also evidence suggesting that older adults may benefit from the upper end of that range, closer to 5 grams, due to the reduced synthesis capacity and lower hormonal support for creatine metabolism we already discussed. The same input at 30 produced one level of brain saturation. At 50, in a different metabolic environment, you may need a slightly higher input to reach the same tissue level. But start at 3 grams. Give it 4 weeks. Observe. Then adjust. Now, timing. The research on creatine timing for cognitive purposes is less definitive than the fitness industry suggests. Consistency matters far more than the hour of the day. That said, there is modest evidence suggesting that taking creatine post-exercise may enhance cellular uptake due to increased blood flow and transporter activity. If you have a structured exercise routine, after training is a reasonable choice. If you do not, take it with your largest meal of the day, when insulin levels are naturally elevated. Insulin supports creatine transport into both muscle and brain tissue. Morning or evening, with food or with water. The variable that determines your results is not which of those you choose, it is whether you do it every day, for months, not weeks. Now, hydration, and this is not optional. Creatine draws water into the cells where it is stored. At 3 to 5 grams per day, this effect is modest. But if you are already chronically underhydrated, which research consistently shows is the norm, not the exception, in adults over 50, that modest additional demand compounds an existing deficit. Add a minimum of 1 additional full glass of water per day when you begin supplementing. More if you exercise regularly or live in a warm climate. The engine does not run on fuel alone. It runs on fuel and coolant. Dehydration is the most common, most underestimated, most easily corrected source of cognitive drag in adults over 40. Do not add a new maintenance protocol on top of an existing deficit. Finally, what to expect and when. You will not feel creatine on day 3. You will not feel it on day 10. The brain does not announce its fuel replenishment. There is no sensation of sharpness arriving on a random afternoon. What you will likely notice, after 3 to 6 weeks of consistent daily use, is a reduction in cognitive friction. Things that required noticeable mental effort start feeling slightly less effortful. Word retrieval is a fraction faster. Sustained focus holds a bit longer before breaking. The mental endurance that used to run out at 3 in the afternoon starts extending. Subtle, cumulative, easy to miss if you aren't paying attention, and easy to dismiss if you stop at 2 weeks because nothing dramatic has happened. The people who stop at 2 weeks were never actually running the protocol. They were testing their patience. Those are different experiments. Give it 6 full weeks of consistent daily use before you assess whether it is working. And during those 6 weeks, pay attention to the right variables. Not how you feel on a given morning. Pay attention to how you perform under cognitive load in the afternoon. How your mental endurance holds across a full demanding day. How quickly you recover cognitive clarity after disrupted sleep. Those are the metrics the phosphocreatine system actually governs. Those are the things that tell you whether the fuel buffer is being restored. The system view. Why single variables fail and systems win. Now let's zoom out. Supplement conversations often make you feel like you found the thing, the missing piece, the intervention that was going to explain everything and fix everything and make the rest of it manageable. And for a few weeks, maybe you feel different. Maybe you attribute that to the supplement. Then the effect plateaus, or you stop noticing, or life disrupts the routine, and you are back where you started, looking for the next thing. This is not a failure of supplements. It is a failure of the mental model. The body is not a lock looking for a key. It is a system. And systems do not respond to single variables the way isolated experiments do. They respond to the interaction between variables, the coordination between components. The overall quality of maintenance across the whole engine. So let's look at the engine as a whole, not the creatine component in isolation. the full system that creatine operates within. Start with sleep, because it is the most consequential maintenance cycle in the entire body and the most consistently underestimated. While you sleep, the brain runs a cleaning protocol called the glymphatic system. Channels in the brain open, cerebrospinal fluid flows through neural tissue, and the metabolic waste products that accumulated during the day, including byproducts of ATP production itself, get cleared from the system. Proteins that, if left to accumulate over years, shift from normal metabolic residue to contributors to long-term neural damage. This cleaning cycle runs primarily during slow-wave sleep, the deep restorative stages that most adults over 40 get progressively less of as sleep architecture changes with age. When the cleaning cycle is incomplete, because sleep was shortened or fragmented or dominated by lighter stages, the brain starts the next day carrying yesterday's residue. Not dramatically, not in a way you can point to, but accumulating quietly over months and years into a cognitive baseline that keeps shifting downward. Now, here is where creatine intersects with this in a way most people have not considered. Research has shown that creatine supplementation can partially offset the acute cognitive impact of a disrupted night. When the overnight maintenance was incomplete, the phosphocreatine buffer provides the brain with emergency fuel to compensate for the deficit it wakes up with. This is real. This is documented. And this sounds like a reason to use creatine instead of fixing your sleep. It is not. It is a reason to do both. Creatine can compensate for an occasional disrupted night. It cannot compensate for a chronically broken maintenance cycle. An engine running overnight maintenance at 50% month after month accumulates damage that no fuel supplement reverses. Creatine reduces the acute performance cost. It does not address the underlying structural wear. Sleep is not optional maintenance. It is the primary maintenance cycle. Everything else, creatine included, works in support of it, not as a replacement for it. Now, resistance training. This is the intervention that the most people over 40 are most consistently avoiding, and the cost of that avoidance is more expensive than almost anyone acknowledges. Resistance training, lifting weight, working against load, does several specific things that are directly relevant to brain function. It stimulates BDNF, a protein that supports the growth and maintenance of neurons. It improves insulin sensitivity, which directly affects how efficiently the brain accesses glucose. And it stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria. Remember the aging generator, the mitochondria declining in number and efficiency after 40. Resistance training is one of the only interventions with strong evidence for actually reversing that specific decline, not slowing it, reversing measurable aspects of it. And here is where the interaction becomes multiplicative rather than additive. Studies on older adults have found that creatine supplementation combined with resistance training produces greater cognitive improvements than either intervention alone, not just the sum of the two effects, more than the sum. The training creates new mitochondria and improves the metabolic environment. The creatine provides the rapid response fuel that makes those mitochondria more effective under cognitive load. They are not independent components running in parallel. They are components that enhance each other's function. This is what a systems view means in practice. The creatine is more effective because of the training. The training is more recoverable because of the creatine. The whole exceeds the parts. Now, nutrition, briefly, because it is foundational and frequently oversimplified. Creatine is synthesized internally from 3 amino acids: arginine, glycine, and methionine. When dietary protein is insufficient, which is extremely common in adults over 50 who eat less protein and absorb it less efficiently, the body's internal creatine synthesis capacity declines further. You are already supplementing to compensate for reduced synthesis and reduced hormonal support. If the raw materials for synthesis are also depleted, the system runs at a deeper deficit. Adequate protein intake after 40 is not about aesthetics. It is structural maintenance. It is the raw material for hormones, neurotransmitters, cellular repair, and the basic biochemical infrastructure that everything else, including creatine metabolism, depends on. And then there is the hormonal environment, which we covered earlier, but which needs to be named explicitly in the systems view. Because the hormonal environment is not a separate conversation from brain energy metabolism, sleep quality, and training recovery. It is the firmware governing all of them simultaneously. Estrogen and testosterone are not just reproductive hormones. They are system-wide regulators. They affect mitochondrial efficiency, creatine metabolism, sleep architecture, insulin sensitivity, inflammatory tone, and neural tissue integrity. When those hormones decline without acknowledgement or support, every other system in this list becomes harder to optimize. This is not an advertisement for any particular intervention. It is a structural observation. You cannot fully optimize the fuel system while ignoring the software governing the fuel system. The components interact. And this is the shift in thinking that separates people who maintain the engine from people who chase single variables. Not what supplement do I take, but which systems are underperforming, which are compensating, and what does each one need to support the others? That is the question a precision engineer asks. That is the question your body deserves after 40. Pre-closing and call to action. Now, let's talk about why you are here. Watching or listening to a long breakdown of brain energy metabolism and creatine synthesis does not mean you are ahead. It means you are paying attention. And paying attention is the prerequisite for everything else. Most people over 40 are not paying attention. They are managing. They are adapting to a slower version of themselves and calling it maturity. They are accepting a lower baseline as the natural price of the years they have lived. You are here because something in you is not ready to accept that. Because you have a sense, even if you cannot fully articulate it, that the body you are living in still has capacity you have not accessed, that the decline you are experiencing is not fixed, that there is a more precise way to maintain this machine. That instinct is correct. And if you want to keep developing it, if you want to keep having conversations this specific, this evidence-based, this focused on the real mechanics of a body running in its 40s, 50s, and beyond, then subscribe to this channel and stay close. This is not a fitness channel. It is not a wellness channel. It is not a place where someone tells you to love yourself and drink more water. It is a place where we look at the body as an engine, the science as the manual, and your daily decisions as maintenance protocols. For people who are serious about the decades ahead, who care about the quality of the years, not just the number of them. If that is you, you belong here. Subscribe. And share this video with at least 5 people in your life who are over 40 and starting to feel the shift, the fog, the fatigue, the body that seems to be working against them instead of with them. Send it to them not as a casual suggestion. Send it as a signal that there is a more useful framework for what they are experiencing. Now, let's bring everything together. We've covered a lot of ground. The phosphocreatine buffer and why it declines after 40. The research on older adults specifically, and what consistent supplementation does to cognitive performance in a brain running with a depleted fuel reserve. The hormonal layer, how estrogen and testosterone govern the very system that creatine supports, and why the hormonal shift of midlife compounds the fuel deficit. The protocol, 3 to 5 grams of creatine monohydrate daily, without a loading phase, consistent with adequate hydration, paired with the right food and movement. And the systems view, why creatine works best not as a standalone intervention, but as a component inside a maintained engine. What that means for the next decade of your life is what we are going to close on now. Closing. Here is something you need to know about how cognitive decline actually arrives. It does not arrive as a diagnosis. It does not show up on a single bad morning where you notice everything is wrong. It arrives as a series of small adjustments you make without realizing you are making them. You stop volunteering for the complex project because it feels harder than it used to.
You stop engaging in certain conversations because tracking them requires more effort than it once did. You stop reaching for the word when you know it will take a beat longer to arrive. You shrink the cognitive demands on your life to match what your brain can reliably deliver. And you call that wisdom, experience, knowing your limits. Sometimes it is those things.
But sometimes, more often than is comfortable to acknowledge, it is a fuel system problem that was never addressed. A phosphocreatine buffer that ran low in your mid-40s and stayed low because no one told you it was happening and no one told you it was addressable. A maintenance gap that accumulated over years into a new, lower normal. The engine did not fail. The maintenance did. And this is the shift I want you to carry out of this. Not just the information about creatine, not just the protocol, the shift underneath all of it. Your body after 40 is not a declining system you are trying to slow down. It is a precision machine operating in a changed environment with changed requirements that responds to changed maintenance. The inputs that worked at 30 do not fully serve you at 50, not because the machine is broken, because the machine is different, more complex, more precise in what it needs, less forgiving of what it is missing. You were not given a broken engine. You were given a different engine.
You were given an engine that requires a different quality of maintenance after 40. There is a significant difference between those two things. One is a sentence you accept. The other is a sentence you act on. The people who act on it, who take the fuel system seriously, who address the hormonal environment honestly, who run the overnight maintenance protocol, who give the structural components the load they need to stay functional, who close the specific gaps that their specific age and biology create, those people arrive at 60 with the control center still running clean. Not perfect, not 25, but sharp enough, reliable enough. Theirs. That is what healthy aging actually looks like. Not the absence of change, the presence of deliberate, informed, consistent maintenance in the face of change. If this gave you the beginning of that, then it did what it was supposed to do. Now do something with it. Subscribe if you are not already here.
Share this with 5 people who need to hear it. People in their 40s and 50s who are adapting to a lower version of themselves and calling it inevitable. Leave a comment and tell me where you want to go next. The heart as a performance engine. Sleep architecture after 40 and what actually restores deep sleep. The metabolic shift that changes how the body handles fuel after 50. Hormones as firmware. What declining estrogen and testosterone actually do to the system, and what the evidence says about supporting them. Tell me, and that is where we will go. The engine is worth maintaining. Until next time, keep optimizing.